Whether it's a movie night or just midday, Skinny Pop is a salty snack that keeps on giving. Made with just 3 simple ingredients for an irresistibly delicious taste and a large serving size that lasts. Deliciously popped, perfectly salted. Skinny Pop, popular for a reason. Shop Skinny Pop now.
Is the band Lawson named after Mark Lawson?
Answer me this, answer me this.
How small a trampoline could you bounce a horse on?
Answer me this, answer me this. Helen and Ollie, answer me this.
As you know, like Pitbull, we are so international.
I was thinking we were wearing muzzles today.
Unlike Pitbull, we are not awful, but we are this week kicking off with a question that proves how international we are, because it's from Jake in Arlington Heights, Illinois.
Oh, is that the most exotic place you could think of?
It is the most populous community in the United States that is incorporated as a village.
Really? I've never really understood the principles of incorporation.
No. I do understand, though, why bigger towns would fight for the right to be villages, whereas big villages probably wouldn't be that keen to be reclassified as towns. You want the amenities, don't you, and the conveniences, but you don't actually want to lose your cosy village status. People like the idea of a village. They also like an out-of-town superstore to be on their doorstep.
Maybe there's some kind of financial or taxation imperative to be incorporated or otherwise.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I don't want to know. Don't explain to me.
Don't get back to us on that, Jake.
Let me preserve my innocence about Arlington Heights, please.
But he has a question for us, which isn't about this at all. He says, I am a married man.
Good for you.
Congratulations.
Why are you rubbing it in all the single people's faces? Smug marrieds.
As such, he says, I am the designated spider killer in my home. Because that is part of the vows. Early in our relationship, with his wife, not with the spider,
spiders.
I would point out spiders to my wife, who would shriek and scream. Later on, I would say, don't move, there's a spider, but this would cause Mrs. T to shriek and scream and call me names.
Whereas Mr. T would just be like, pitiful fool, point out a spider.
Now, having wised up, continues Jake, or as he's just confessed to us, Mr. T.
Oh my God, it's Mr. T.
When I see an arachnid, I engage my wife in light conversation and move about as if getting a drink.
God, how did it take you so long to learn the art of misdirection?
Then, having taken up a paper napkin or a tissue, I capture the spider and am halfway to the loo to flush it before my darling spouse has even realised what I've done.
You sly dog.
That is slick.
Keeping secrets in the marriage.
So, Helen, answer me this. How do you handle spiders in your marital home?
Well, when you're taking a third into a relationship, well, it's weird in this flat. We don't get that many spiders, but most of the ones we get are absolutely enormous, like big, gnarly legs. And I am naturally freaked out by things with big, gnarly legs.
So are you saying Martin is the spider catcher in this house?
Yeah.
I'm a bit arachnophobic, and the way that I respond to that is by
overcompensating with violence.
I capture. No, I do. I
You once just slapped one onto the wall.
Yeah, I sometimes just catch spiders with my bare hands because I have such an aversion to them. The only way I can confront that is by grabbing it.
But you kill them. Rather than
yeah,
setting them free.
usually.
I don't like the idea of killing something just because it's kind of in my way.
It's a trespasser. It's the Tony Martin defence.
But in nature, it would be a lot worse. I mean, it would get pecked to death by a bird, and it wouldn't be half as
Yes, but
kind.
what makes us different as human beings is our ability to make a moral judgment on that, isn't it? And
Okay.
I would happily eat it, but
Right,
since
so
I don't
if
have
you were
any
really
use for
hungry,
it,
you would happily eat your house spider?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, happily.
But I don't need to kill that spider, and it wouldn't take much hassle for me to throw it out the window.
I don't need to eat a whelk, but I still do.
But he also swats whelks that turn up in the bathroom.
I wish.
I don't know whether it's because we do get some large spiders, though, and occasionally trotting past the bedposts, but I do hallucinate large spiders a lot
That's
in my
your
sleep.
real technique to dealing with spiders, creating a lot in your brain.
Yeah, it's often bright fluorescent green spiders coming down from the ceiling onto my face. The other night, the spider hallucinations took on a special turn because I woke Martin up by rummaging through his hair looking for a spider that I thought was in there.
And what did you find?
I found quite an irate Martin,
Yeah.
funnily enough. Anyway, Jake, I hope that has made your wife's spider fear seem a bit more tolerable and normal. Here is a question from Josh from New York, who says, I've recently taken to watching HBO shows such as The Sopranos and Game of Thrones on my iPad at my posh gym.
That's very much playing to the strengths of the posh gym, I think. You can't do that whilst you're running around a field, can you?
No.
Yeah. And at a posh gym, no one's going to steal your iPad, probably.
But you might get sweat on your iPad.
I reckon he's the kind of guy who's bought an accessory to prevent that.
Unfortunately, says Josh, these shows can be more than a little risque. They include scenes with nudity and fairly explicit sex. When these scenes pop up, I desperately flail my hands in front of the screen so that my fellow gym mates won't see, but I'm not sure if this is sufficient.
Yeah, I rather fear that's drawing attention to what is otherwise a perfectly understandable situation.
Indeed. Ollie, answer me this. Is it appropriate to continue watching these shows at a gym?
No, it's neither appropriate nor inappropriate.
It's inappropriate if there are loads of kids there, but presumably at a posh gym there are no kids there.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like it's actually pornography.
No,
it's a sex scene in a thing, and people understand what that is.
He's not worrying about the violence in Game of Thrones, is he?
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? What does that say about America, Josh?
If I do watch them, says Josh, do I have an obligation to obscure all the naughty bits so that I don't look like a pervert?
No, because you're not British Airways.
Maybe you can get a special Amish cut of Game of Thrones where they're all clothed at all times. Also, why don't you just turn this brightness down on the iPad a bit, because then...
People can hardly see it. I think the major concern here, if you unpick Josh's psychological prognosis, is not that other people are exposed to this material. I think his major concern is that
what will
he
they
realises
think of him?
exactly that other people can see him watching this material. They
And
get
what-
a sneak of a boob or a chest and they realise that he's watching filth.
What kind of pervert can't wait until the privacy of his own home? He has to watch it when he's at the gym.
Exactly. And he wants to convey the impression that he's not just watching this material for the sexy bits, even though he kind of is because it's Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
And that actually he's watching something incredibly intellectual at his posh gym.
What you could do, if you just want to make sure that they know that it's not porn, and that it's definitely a fancy program with fancy artistic intentions, is put the subtitles on. Because then maybe they'll think it's a French film.
French film, yeah,
and
that's a good one.
That's classy, isn't it, to watch at the gym?
Or, I mean, if you're really this self-involved, I mean, no one is actually looking at you to work this out, but if you're really this self-involved that you are in a moment of absolute apoplectic crisis about this, just look away. Like, if there's a sex scene on, make a point of looking at something different. So if someone walks past you, they can see that you're not entirely engrossed in the sex scene. It just happens to be on. You're not bothered either way. It just happens to be on. You're watching it for the story, and there's a sex scene happening.
Why not just whip yourself with your hair shirt while you're at
Yes,
it?
good idea. I think any reaction, Ollie, where he's changing his normal mode of behaviour because a sex scene's on, is drawing attention to him and making him seem more weird.
Yeah, but not when you're on a treadmill, because it's natural to look ahead of you anyway, isn't it? Unless the iPad's right in front of his eyes anyway.
Well, he might not be on a treadmill. He might be on a rowing machine, so he's sort of going backwards and forwards into the Game of Thrones. Or he might be pulling weights. He might be swimming. I don't know.
Yeah, I've not seen anyone swim whilst watching an iPad, but I suppose it's the future.
It's going to happen. Here's a question from Jordan from Bridgend in South Wales, who says, I was clearing my room as I'm moving to university soon.
Good luck.
Yay! And I came across some American coins that I had left over from an old holiday to Florida.
And if you're going on holiday to Florida, listeners, remember to take the Answer Me This Holiday album with you to discover the truth about the utilidors at Disney World.
And if you're looking for a more interesting souvenir, if you're going on holiday to Florida, try a little toy manatee. Manatees are cute.
Yeah, they are, yeah.
I noticed, says Jordan, that all the heads on the coins were facing left, except for Abraham Lincoln on the 1-cent pieces. Ollie, answer me this. Why is Lincoln facing right and not left like the other heads on the American coins?
Actually, Thomas Jefferson on some coins also faces right.
Oh, I was wondering whether Abraham Lincoln was shot in the other side of his head and they thought it would be insensitive to show him facing left.
He was shot in the back of the head, wasn't he?
Well, then in that case,
I don't think they ever considered having the back of his head on a coin.
Why do they never have people looking head on in coins? They never do they? It's always profile.
Well, in fact, Thomas Jefferson on some American coins is looking straight
Staring
at
right
you.
out, terrifyingly, like an eagle.
In Lincoln's case, the reason is because the sculptor who designed the penny piece, Victor David Brenner, designed that penny based on a photograph of Lincoln.
Wow, they have... photography is always much older than I think it is.
Yeah. February the 9th, 1864.
Bloody hell!
By Anthony Berger, the photographer. In the photo, Lincoln faced right. So it's a reference to that. So that's why he faces right on the penny.
And it wasn't that easy to go into Photoshop and flip the photo in those days.
Well, it wouldn't be right, would it?
Sculpture Shop. It was a really expensive program.
But in the case of Jefferson, the reason he also faces right, and in some cases straight on, looking straight down the barrel like Nick Clegg, is because in 2003 they reissued the nickel on which Jefferson used to face left. And to signify that they'd reissued it, they wanted to make that side of the coin look different, because they changed the reverse side of the coin to commemorate Lewis and Clark.
Right.
They wanted something on that side to indicate they'd done that. And actually what happened is the Mint, instead of just doing it once, did a series of nickels. One in which he faced left like he used to, one in which he faced right, and one in which, indeed, I think it's the 2004 version of the nickel, he is looking straight at you.
Jesus.
But actually, the reason that Jefferson does face forward in that one is also because it's based on an artwork. It's based on a portrait done by Rembrandt Peale in 1800, right before Jefferson became president.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's not because the presidents all have a preferred side like Mariah Carey does, so all of her albums she's facing the same way.
Well, actually, it could be,
Possible.
couldn't it? Because they're based on official portraiture. So,
Yeah.
yeah, they probably did specify, like the Queen might now.
Yeah, why was Lincoln facing to the right?
Yeah.
Well, learning.
Yep.
I hope you're satisfied with that, Jordan.
And if you're not, it's the best I can do.
He's probably thrown them all away now and forgot he ever asked. He's at university now. Way!
Yeah. He's left us behind.
I've got a question. Email your question. To answer me this podcast at googlemail.com. To answer me this podcast at googlemail.com. To answer me this podcast at googlemail.com.
So, retrospectors, what historical events are we ticking off on this week's run of Today in History?
On Monday, the anniversary of the day Ozzy Osbourne and a bat came face to face on stage.
On Tuesday, we go back to the future with a potted history of the DeLorean.
On Wednesday, why is the Pope guarded by those guys in floofy hats?
On Thursday, how the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame ended up in Cleveland.
And on Friday, was Henry VIII really an asshole, or was it just the result of a jousting accident?
We discuss this and more on Today in History with the Retrospectors. 10 minutes each weekday, wherever you get your podcasts.
Here's a question from Alice, who says, I bought a cake stand recently which has space to hold 13 cupcakes.
Ollie could hold those for you.
In my belly. She says, my mum tells me this is a baker's dozen. Mm-hmm. She's right, isn't she? But Helen, answer me this. Why is a baker's dozen 13 when anyone else's dozen is 12? Yeah.
Well,
Is it because of spoilage?
I thought it was, as in you bake 13 in case
Because
one
one
of them
goes
turns out
bad.
rubbish.
Yeah.
But it turns out actually to have a much more serious historical origin.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Was one to poison a Catholic with or something?
Probably to. I mean, at some point in British history, everything was to poison a Catholic. Bakers had a very long-standing reputation of being shifty and shortchanging people, right back into Egyptian times and probably beyond then.
All the way up to Greg's today.
So they started imposing harsh punishments on bakers that were shortchanging people, and in 1266, King Henry III revived an ancient statute, the Assize of Bread and Ale, that regulated the price of bread according to the price of wheat. And what it meant that if bakers or brewers, to whom presumably you gave your wheat to convert into bread or brew, gave you...
Shortchanging you.
Yeah, if they were shortchanging you, they could be fined, pilloried, or flogged, which are pretty bad punishments.
That is a big punishment for just a humble baker.
Yeah. So they would make extra, sometimes as many as 14 in a baker's dozen, to ensure that they were giving people back the weight. But you know what happened though? The bakers were still dodgy. They just started cutting the flour with sand and stuff.
The bakers always win. It's funny when you get these historic things based on distrust that
Yes.
then in the modern era seem entirely irrelevant.
Oh, just a lovely phrase. An apple cheek baker's made an extra hot cross bun just for you.
It's like when the royal baby was born, there was this issue about apparently it was one of the first to be born without the Home Secretary being in the room.
Oh,
Which goes
God.
back. Can you imagine Theresa May being there whilst giving birth? And apparently that was because in olden times they wanted to check that the baby that was being born was the one of royal lineage, not one that had been subbed at the last minute as a fake royal baby to usurp the throne.
I wouldn't trust Theresa May to be that observant about babies, because babies look quite similar to each other. They could easily be switched.
No, but it was just to say when you say there's a new king/queen that it had indeed come out of the royal womb. Yeah.
Oh no. No wonder Diana had such an awful time.
I don't know if she had the Home Secretary there, but apparently, if it wasn't this one that was the first, it was Diana or the one just before that. It's a fairly recent thing the Home Secretary hasn't been there.
Imagine Jack Straw gazing up your crowning vagina.
Yeah. I can't. I literally can't.
No, I can't imagine.
I can imagine it, and it's the worst thing that has ever happened in my mind.
Okay, well, let's move back to cakes. Here's another question of cake from Leo, who says, in à la recherche du temps perdu.
Very good, Ollie.
Never heard of it.
So Marcel Proust.
Oh, okay. Memories are triggered by madeleines. As
cake?
in the little cakes,
Yeah.
So he says, Helen, answer me this. Were the little cakes in à la recherche du temps perdu named after someone called Madeleine, or vice versa?
Well, it'd be ridiculous if the name Madeline, the popular woman's name, was them being named after cake.
Would it?
Yes.
I'm trying to think. May,
Custard
that name,
cream.
and June probably are named after the month.
Yes, but not after cakes.
I don't know. I don't know, if you really liked a cake, is it so crazy? Seems like the kind of thing the Beckhams would do. So if that's not the case, Helen...
Yes, the cakes.
How did the cakes come to be called Madeleine?
Oh, annoyingly, it's disputed. It almost certainly was named after a pastry cook called Madeleine.
We can't be sure if it's based on bakers' testimonial history because they're very distrustworthy.
Bloody liars.
Yeah.
But they just don't know which Madeleine. So the most likely Madeleine was one picked by Louis XV in 1755. And that Madeleine was Madeleine Pommier, who was his father-in-law's cook, and she made lovely madeleines. So Louis XV adored them so much he made them popular all over France. The end. And the other explanation that I favour is that someone poached the recipe off some nuns at the convent of St Mary Magdalene, and the name just got corrupted a bit.
Madeleines aren't my favourite.
A bit bland.
I like the ones with the currants in.
French cakes generally don't quite meet the English cakes for taste, and I think French food is better usually, but not with cakes.
More icing, more frivolity, more sugar blast. That's what French cakes need. More fun.
Fewer rules.
Yes.
I think the English are just like, oh, this tastes good.
Yeah, more of it.
You know, and sometimes that can make us look a little bit unsophisticated, and that's where the French win.
That's all right.
But when it comes to cake, you don't want sophistication, you just want,
Sophistication.
What about nice gâteau, though? I mean, that's a French word,
yes,
isn't
gâteau is good.
Yeah, but then the Austrians probably still have them pegged on the gâteau. It's like the Franco-Prussian Wars all over again, but in cake. The reason why I dislike madeleines is not only because I find them uninteresting to eat, and cake should always be fun and interesting, right? Is because the Proust Madeleine is, in my mind, the second most overused journalistic literary cliche.
I don't know what you're talking about. So this is in this book, À la recherche de temps perdu.
He eats the Madeleine and it spins him back to times past. I often get that with smells. For instance, when I smell hot tarmac, that spins me back to the Russian exchange in 1995 that went on with school. And so journalists will go, blah, 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 was like Proust Madeleine for me. Like seeing Brett Anderson back on stage with Suede was like Proust Madeleine.
But that... I mean, if I don't get that reference, I'm not rating myself ridiculously here. I reckon a lot of people wouldn't.
My least favourite journalistic literary cliche, since you didn't ask, is people starting articles, or in fact novels as well, with "It is a truth universally acknowledged."
Oh yeah, I've seen that one.
Don't do it anymore. You don't need it. You can just start the sentence a bit later.
Father of the Bride speech, that as well, isn't it? Unaccustomed as I am to public speaking, large laugh.
Luckily, my dad doesn't get out enough to know all the cliches, so he can do them.
My friend Nick, who just got married to his lovely wife Lucy, on the day of the wedding, came up to me slightly paranoically and said, apparently when I do my speech, the thing you do is you say my wife and I, and then people clap.
Why was he asking you?
He wasn't asking me, he was telling me. And he said, so, I mean, I've never heard that before, so can you just make sure that people clap when I say that? I really anxiously said, I was like, yeah, okay, people will clap, it'll be fine. And then, but of course what happened is he went, my wife and I was like the first, I just looked like I fucking love that joke. It's like I was requesting it at a gig.
One thing you need to be aware of is that in this country it's very impolite if you shake hands. The local custom here is to stand back to back and rub your buttocks together. It takes some time to get used to, but you can make some wonderful new friends. Cheers.
Answer Me This Holiday. Travel the world from the comfort of your own headphones. Out now at answermethispodcast.com/albums.
Okay, here's a question from Martin, who says, Helen, answer me this. Where does Father's Day come from? Is it an old tradition, possibly with religious origins?
Nah.
Or is it just a modern invention by makers of cards depicting golf, football, cars and beer?
I don't think they had those cards floating around with no purpose prior to the invention of Father's Day. Like, why are we producing so many golf cards, guys? No one buys them.
Don't forget farting. They often feature farting and also Del Boy as well.
I've never bought a Father's Day card, so that's all new to me.
No, well, both those things aren't necessarily your father's main interest, are they? I don't know how he fares on wind.
Yeah, he wouldn't...
Sitcom-wise, he'd be more into the golf one, I think.
No, I think he would be more into one that depicted an arc welder or a chainsaw.
Right. But my dad, he's very much on the Venn diagram of Del Boy and farting, so Father's Day cards are great for him, very easy to find in Clinton's. And this year I actually got him one that depicted a bowl full of baked beans, and it just said, Happy Farters Day.
Clever. But that's a different day entirely.
But I did think it's a gender stereotype that wouldn't be tolerated on Mother's Day in the same way, like a humorous observation about how people stereotype women.
Yeah.
You know, if it was said like, hi Mum, you'll remember that argument we had and then throw it back in my face in 5 years' time. Happy Mother's Day. You wouldn't get that, would you?
Also, women do fart.
Never.
But is that reflected by the card market? No.
Anyway, Martin continues. Am I right to choose to observe Mother's Day by sending a card? I can answer that for you. I say yes, Helen says no.
Well, my mother says no.
Yeah. And small present, and yet to ignore Father's Day. or Father's Day.
I suppose it depends. I mean, if you're having a big beef with your father but not with your mother, then yes.
Yeah.
If you love your father more than your mother, then that might not be reflected in your card buying pattern.
I think you're right in the sense that certainly historically, when mothers did more in the family home, domestically and everything, it was more necessary to have a Mother's Day than Father's Day. You're right to say that one is worth slightly more than the other. However, in 2013, I think if you're doing Mother's Day and your father is alive and as much a part of your family as your mother, it's kind of a bit weird not to do Father's Day too. Like, you have to do neither or both.
Do you want to live in a world where this gender imbalance is observed?
Exactly.
I don't know where you're writing from, Martin, but Mother's Day in the UK did have a religious origin. It was part of Lent.
Hence Mothering Sunday.
Exactly, but it's now become elided with Mother's Day, which was an American invention, which is why their Mother's Day is in May and ours is in March. After the Civil War, one town brought together the mothers of Confederate and Union soldiers.
Wow, so it was
like the football at Christmas during the First World War.
Yeah,
and
I didn't know it was one of those and the band played on type moments.
And so they tried to implement Father's Day as well, but it didn't really catch on until 1908. The first ever Father's Day was a Sunday sermon in West Virginia to commemorate 362 men who had died in an explosion in a coal mine. But then the following year, after that fun Father's Day for all the dead miners, a woman in Spokane in Washington named Sonora Smart Dodd tried to establish an official Mother's Day for fathers because she was raised by a single father, and she went to a lot of churches and YMCAs and local organisations to drum up support, and hence the first proper Father's Day that wasn't because of tragic miners' explosions was on July the 19th in 1910, and then it sort of caught on around other parts of America, and then in 1972, Richard Nixon signed a proclamation to make Father's Day permanent.
Right,
so it's all thanks to Richard Nixon that we have Father's Day.
Well, he did so many good things.
Oh, so I'd imagine that if we have it in the UK because it was one of those commercial festivals that came over from America, as Halloween is invading now.
Yes, but at least it does have some origins in something a little bit nicer than that. It wasn't exactly created by Moonpig. There was some spiritual purpose to it.
In 1864, Moonpig Johnson tried to drum together support for all the fathers that had died in the boating accident.
I think as well, Martin, you have to look at how your parents have responded to the presents that you have got them and really make an assessment based on that as to whether it's worth spending the same.
Again, making a gender stereotype, perhaps the average father would be less miffed by a slightly crappy recognition of the day than a mother would.
Yeah. Same present every year is fine for most dads.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I can make that generalisation. My dad is always happy with the bottle of brandy and the Just Brazils. He doesn't want me to think outside literally that box of Brazil nuts.
No, well, why would you? Just Brazils are very nice.
Yeah. Whereas my mum, she wants variety.
She would want you to think.
She feels I've been thinking about her every year.
What would Karen Mann like this year?
Yes.
She's not the same Karen Mann as in 2008.
Quite right. And for her, it's really important that I spend at least 10 minutes thinking about what I'm going to write in the card. And I've got to try and find some sort of observation. Because I know it's going to be on display for like 5 years as well.
Right.
Whereas with my dad, literally, hey Dad, love Ollie.
With your mum, couldn't you just say, I know I said this last year, Mum, but you're more beautiful than ever?
Well,
that would go down every year.
That would, good point. I might get those produced now, just so I've got 20 to back me up for the next couple of decades.
It's such a waste that I've never done Mother's Day, because I've clearly got all of the cheesy remarks.
Got all the platitudes ready to go. Also, the presents that I get my dad, they just stay shrink-wrapped and on the dining room table. Including most recently a box set of every episode of Hello Hello ever, which I know every episode is exactly the same, but you'd still think he'd want to watch one.
Yeah, you'd unwrap it just to get one.
The annoying thing is, I'm an observer of his viewing habits, and I know that if Hello Hello is on gold, he'll sit and watch it with the commercials and miss the first 10 minutes, and yet he won't watch the DVD. What's that about?
It's because he wants to watch it in that serendipitous way and not in a deliberated, calculated way.
I wish it was that simple, but it's more complicated than that, because I also have bought him every episode ever of Curb Your Enthusiasm,
right?
And yet he tapes it...
That's a bit close to the bone, isn't it?
And yet he tapes it every week on Sky Atlantic.
What a
and
pervert.
Waits for it and then watches it and gets annoyed if he misses 5 minutes of it.
Well,
he's got them all.
It's because he doesn't like this modern viewing by choice habit.
I think he can't be asked to get off the sofa and put the DVD in, is the truth of it.
Yeah, it's easier, to actually look out for something and record it every week.
Yeah.
It's a big commitment as well to be like, to say, I'm going to watch this episode now, whereas if it just happens to be on, or you happen to be there when it's on, it's almost like it's making the decision for you, isn't it?
And therefore it doesn't matter if you're not enjoying it because you didn't choose it, whereas putting the DVD in, conscious choice could backfire.
So much cognitive dissonance.
Also, former flatmate of the show, Matthew Crosby, would never ever watch a DVD that he was given as a gift, even if it was something he really wanted.
Really?
Never would unwrap them.
That's so perverse.
Why not?
Yeah, I don't know. That's just one of his things.
In this time of purse strings tightening, the internet's a smorgasbord of fabulous free things like showbiz news, no need for magazines stalking your old school friends. Videos of fat kids falling over, stealing films and music, sharing photos of your nan, filing your tax return. But by far my favourite free thing to type is answer me this into Skype.
Here's a question from a man who says, I'm leaving this anonymous, but would appreciate it if you'd refer to me as either Robert Downey Jr. or Mrs. Thatcher.
These are very disparate people to choose to hide behind.
They're certainly both taken, though, I think it's fair to say, as pseudonyms.
As Nims.
Indeed. You're unlikely to be proven by history to be the definitive one.
Iron Man or Iron Lady.
He says, Helen, answer me this. Am I a virgin?
I don't know you.
No, I think he's going to give us some background information here to help him with this.
Okay.
Because otherwise I agree that would be hard to answer. He says, most of my friends are very conservative, and we all know that young conservatives rarely have sex. And sex rarely comes up in conversation.
That's all right.
So I'm not sure who to turn to with this question, so I'm asking for your input.
You know Dan Savage is around.
Yeah, it's a strange choice.
I just feel like he's better at talking about sex on podcasts than we are.
He continues. The fact is, I have never felt the inner sanctum of womanly genitalia pleasurably encapsulating my winkle.
Such lofty language until the last word.
Yeah, well, obviously he's been reading books rather than having sex, which might stand him in good stead for the future.
Time well spent, and people do consider it rude if you read books during sex, by the way.
There was some ridiculous survey, and I really do mean just obviously made up, which was just there to gather column inches.
Yes.
Which said something like 60% of women have looked at their phone whilst they're making love. That was the statistic.
Yeah, it's probably more like 80%.
It's probably as realistically 1 in 10.
We might have
looked at their phone.
You might have looked towards it. Does that count?
One thing I have done is I've glanced at the clock to see how long we've been going. But that's out of curiosity,
and
not
pride.
out of... that's not... or fear. It's not out of... boredom.
You do have an enormous stopwatch by your bed as well.
I finished the Telegraph cryptic once, but that doesn't count.
It's the closest thing you've ever had to a sexual experience.
Well, our anonymous contributor continues. Although he has never felt...
the inner sanctum.
The inner sanctum. He has, however, had the pleasure of a small number of orgasms induced by fellatio.
Well done.
I have happily reciprocated. Cunnilingually.
Good.
He is good with words, isn't he?
Yes.
He's a cunning linguist.
Yeah.
This obviously means I've had a number of sexual experiences beyond the bounds of a friendly bum or tit squeeze.
I mean, that is just getting groped on the tube.
Yes. Yeah, but it's this is more interesting than it appears at first glance, Helen. So he's saying, Helen, answer me this. Am I a virgin or not? So he's had oral sex a number of times. Does that count?
Well, that is a very interesting question because a lot of gay men and women may also never have a penis in the feminine canal.
Yes.
But
they definitely not consider themselves virgins.
So I think the conventional definition of virginity is probably up for some kind of amendment.
And yet he's straight and he seems to want to conquer a woman's feminine parts with his man wang. Is it, therefore, in that context, that he is still a virgin? Because these things cease to matter, of course, when you are no longer a virgin.
Yes.
But in the time that you consider yourself still a virgin, this definition is quite important, I think.
I think probably he's still a virgin, but I wouldn't necessarily say that to everybody, particularly if they were not heterosexual. And then there must be...
But even then, even in the gay example, right, I reckon there's a lot of people who would say, well, you know, we used to do mutual masturbation at boarding school.
Yeah.
But then that's not them losing their virginity.
I don't think we should label it. I don't feel...
But he's asking us to, Martin. Saying, is he a virgin or not? What's your answer, yes or no?
I don't think it's binary. I think it's...
But it is. He's saying, I want a yes or no answer.
Then his premises are incorrect.
I think his state of mind suggests that even though for other people this definition would work for not being a virgin, I think he probably still feels like one. That's why he's asking.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think he's growing up in a post-American Pie landscape, isn't he? Where clearly, by that stretch, he's a virgin.
If you have sex with a pie, it doesn't count. or a rubber doll or seashell that is roughly vagina-shaped.
But penetration of a mouth happened, you're probably not really a virgin.
Well, you're sexually experienced.
Sexually experienced, yeah.
The church would say that your virginity still existed,
Yeah, that's
but very
true, yeah.
strict churches probably would say any kind of physical contact was was defying virginity. I've also got some friends who have been penetrated but still decided that they were virgins because it was just like...
Because they got penetrated by the wrong person?
Yeah.
It's non-canonical.
Yeah, and it didn't go for much
Turns
longer
out
than that.
if he's a dickhead, then you haven't lost your virginity.
Yeah. Turns out if after 3 years you decided the relationship was no good, your virginity grows back. But the definition has changed a lot, hasn't it, from when it was just like, well, if your hymen's intact...
Yes. I think that's right.
Listeners, it's such a complex issue that we would appreciate your input. I do not mean that in a double entendre way.
No, and we'd appreciate your virginity loss stories. At what point did you consider that you'd lost your virginity? Was it in one penetrative thunderclap, or was it a series of small fellatio-induced experiences?
Or was it with one particularly meaningful handshake?
Yep.
It may have different meanings to anybody. So if you have any... contributions to make upon the definition of virginity, or if you just have a question, then please send those in via email, phone or Skype, and our contact details are on our website,
answermethispodcast.com. And also on there you can buy some merchandise featuring our faces and logo.
So not answer me this condoms for your first sexual experiences.
Yet included in that selection of delights is a Helen and Ollie wall clock. And I can vouch for this.
Because that's what you time your sexual intercourse on.
I've just moved house, and despite the fact that we have decided to opt for a more sophisticated interior mode than we had in our previous slightly juvenile frat pad kind of vibe.
Ollie is a traitor to himself, and he's got rid of all of his fun kitsch. Is that toy slice of pizza that I gave you still there?
That's very much still there.
Oh, thank God.
Girlfriend likes that one, that's all right.
Okay, good. It is smiling nicely.
But a lot of the primary colours have been dulled down. Despite that fact, the Helen and Ollie wall clock works just as well in the new sophisticated and cosy cottage environs as it did in the inner city urban 20-something pad.
Not exactly gritty urban, though. Very leafy streets
Indeed.
to live on.
It's a good clock, is what I'm saying. Get the clock.
Also on that website are Answer Me This episodes 1 to 120.
That's right. If you've wondered where are the first 3 years of the show on the free feed, they're there. We asked for money for them.
Just 79 pence each, though. So, well, 79.9 pence each. But who's counting? Some of you are counting the 0.9 pence. Yeah. Anyway, listeners, please return next week for Answer Me This 268. Bye!